What they saw was that the failure group actually took 24 to 48 hours longer to recover from a hormonal and neuromuscular standpoint. Hey guys, Anthony Pietrobono here, online coach, personal trainer, and university student. For today's video, I want to go over 2 new studies that are helping you guys accelerate your muscle gain. So the first study was actually released this month and is by Tomiya and colleagues. They basically took 2 groups. So they took 14 subjects, ages 21 to 22 years old, males, and they split them in 2 groups. One group performed 30 minutes of some steady state. So the first study was just released and it was by Tomiya and colleagues. They basically took 14 subjects, males ages 21 to 22 years old. They split them up in 2 groups. One group performed 30 minutes of some moderate intensity steady state cardio directly after the resistance training sessions. The other group performed this 30-minute moderate intensity steady state session 24 hours after their training sessions. So the protocol was 2 resistance training sessions and 2 cardio sessions, either to be done immediately after their training session or 24 hours after their training session. They measured 1 rep max, they measured cross-sectional muscle area to see the gain that they made over these 8 weeks. It was an 8-week protocol. They also measured performance in the counter jump movement and a few other exercises. So what the interesting findings of this study are that the group who had the cardio 24 hours after the resistance training sessions actually gained 10% more muscle than the group that had this 30 minutes of moderate intensity steady state exercise on the bike immediately after their sessions. So this is really interesting. Their strength gains, everything else was exactly identical. The only difference is that over the course of this 8-week period, the group that did their cardio 24 hours later gained 10% more muscle than the group who performed the cardio right after. Now, the reason why this is really interesting is because we've always been told, we've always known from previous studies that obviously it's not a great idea to do your cardio right before your training sessions, because if you do your cardio right before, then your performance is going to be impaired and obviously you won't be able to perform as well and you won't gain muscle as well. So this is what's interesting though. So we always place our cardio sessions immediately after our training sessions, and we believe that everything is okay because we're going to be performing as optimally as we can and then performing that steady state cardio. It's only moderate intensity, it's not very taxing after the workout. So we would think that everything's going to be okay and we'd be progressing as quickly as we could be. But the idea behind that is that it's going to be impairing on the recovery because you're eating into that window where you're performing the cardio directly after the training session. So if you can, it's going to be 100% optimal to be placing that cardio session 24 hours after your resistance training session. The key here though is if you're training 6 days a week and you have 3 cardio sessions per week, you're not going to be able to place that cardio session 24 hours after because you're going to be training the next day anyways. In this study, they only had 2 days of resistance training and 2 cardio sessions. So it totally made sense and it was very easy to be splitting up those sessions. Now, for most of my clients are on a 5-day training cycle a week or a 6-day training cycle a week. A very few on a 4-day split. The few on the 4-day split, they might have a few cardio sessions a week and they can split it up. That's going to be practical. But it will not be practical for the clients who have 5 or 6 days of training a week and they won't be able to fit it in that 24-hour window. Now what's interesting is in this study, they also measured everything if they did it in a 6 hours post or a 12 hours post. And what they found is that the medium ground, which is actually very good and very reasonable because it's practical for most people, they can perform their cardio session 6 hours after their training sessions and they will still gain more muscle than the group that performed that cardio immediately afterwards. So the takeaway here, guys, is if you're on a training split where you're training 5 days a week, if you have a few cardio sessions, try to push that cardio session, split it up and have it at least 6 hours after your resistance training sessions. So you could train in the AM and you can have the cardio in the PM, or vice versa. You can have that cardio session fasted if it works very easily for you. Then you can have that training session later on in the evening. At least 6 hours. 12 hours would be even better for growth. 24 hours would be optimal for growth. But again, for most people, it's just not practical. So you have to find that common ground, guys. Find what's practical for your workout split and your lifestyle and find that medium ground. So for myself personally, I'm going to be splitting all my cardio sessions in a 6-hour window, at least 6 hours. So 6 to 12 hours. I'm going to be training and having my cardio sessions at least 6 hours later. So that way I can ensure that I'm properly recovering and milking more out of that muscle hypertrophy. So the second study was done by Navarro and colleagues in 2017, September 30th. Very recent, and that's actually quite groundbreaking because they basically showed the recovery process behind training to failure and see is it worth it to train to failure in certain scenarios. So they had 10 resistance trained men who had 8 years of training experience. So these weren't any newbies. Since there's only 10 people, they had 3 groups of training. One group was high volume, no failure. The other group was low volume, no failure. And the other group was high volume with failure. So there's 3 groups, and they had all 10 of these participants try each phase with 4 weeks of no training in between each phase to make sure everything was balanced. So when they were in the low volume, no failure group, they performed 3 sets of 5 repetitions of exercises like the squat, bench press, deadlift, overhead press. And then when they were in the high volume, no failure group, they were doing 5 sets of 10 reps. And then when they were in the high volume failure group, they were doing 5 sets of 10 reps, training to failure on those sets. What they realized in the recovery process was that the 2 no failure groups actually had the exact same results. So all volume was equated across all 3 of these different training protocols. The only difference was that in that third group, they were taking their sets to failure, whereas the other groups, they were stopping a few reps in the tank. What they saw was that the failure group actually took 24 to 48 hours longer to recover from a hormonal and neuromuscular standpoint. This basically means that it took 24 to 48 hours longer for their body to recover before they were optimal again and they could perform again in terms of their neuromuscular function and in terms of their hormone panel. Because they took blood tests, they were measuring all these markers. They were measuring creatine kinase levels, they were measuring creatinine, which is basically a muscle wasting enzyme. They were seeing how much of this was in their blood. And in the failure group, obviously the creatine kinase levels were skyrocketed because they took those sets to failure. And then obviously in terms of hormones as well, their hormones were fluctuated and off 24 to 48 hours after their training sessions. The conclusions from this study are basically saying if you don't periodize your resistance training when you're implementing failure sets, then you can burn out and actually negatively progress as the weeks go by if you have this failure training long term, if you're taking lots of sets to failure with a high volume training protocol. Now, I would assume that if you're on a low volume training protocol, it's completely fine to take pretty much the majority of your sets to failure. However, if you're on a high volume training protocol, it wouldn't make sense to take those first sets to failure because the rest of your workout is going to suffer and you will not be able to complete the same amount of total volume in that workout. So your goal, guys, is ideally the recommendations and the takeaways from this study are to take your last sets to failure and pretty much have just isolation sets, take those ones to failure. Don't be taking squats or deadlifts too often to failure. You can take 1 set of those to failure, but you don't want to take multiple compound exercise movements to failure. You want to be saving it for those last sets on those isolation exercises. Those are the ones you want to take to failure because it's going to be easier to recover from a hormonal and a neuromuscular standpoint. So I just wanted to break down those 2 new groundbreaking studies for you guys. Honestly, I'm going to be implementing this with my clients. I'm going to be adjusting a few clients' protocols. I'm very excited for this new news. So this is some good stuff, guys. You want to really make sure, again, that if you're going to train to failure, you don't want to take those sets to failure at the end of your workout and in those isolation exercises. And you want to properly periodize your training accordingly. So obviously, you're on a high volume training program. You're not going to take that many sets to failure. You want to have some periods of deloading so you can let your body recover. And then also in the other study, if you can, you're going to want to place that cardio session at least 6 hours apart from your resistance training sessions. Ideally and optimally, you're going to have that cardio session 24 hours after your training session. But for most people, it's simply not practical. For me, I know for myself personally, it's not really practical. So I'm going to be splitting my training and my cardio sessions within a 6-hour period. So I hope you guys found some value from these 2 studies. I really surely did. So again, if you guys did like this video, then please give me a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And subscribe for more vlogs and more informative bodybuilding content like this. My job is to make your guys' contest preps easier, make you guys build muscle easier, and make everything go smoothly. So I'll see you guys in that next video. Peace.